Today on Wolf Guitars and Gear, we're going to be talking about one of my least favorite but most rewarding parts of a guitar build, and that is the guitar wiring. Stay tuned to find out more about what we've done with our Telecaster. Okay, so standard tele or not. Obviously it has a P90 in the neck, and there's several other Telecasters out there that have that, so that's not all that strange. But let's look at this a little bit more. What do we see? We see two knobs and a switch. But if we get in a little closer here from an angle, you can see those aren't normal knobs. These are concentric knobs, and we've got a switch, which has 5 positions instead of 3. So we're going to talk about that here as we dive into some of the wiring mods that I did on this thing. You're going to fail, but that's okay. I'm here to help you get through it and to find success on the other side of failure. You know, guitar wiring is probably one of the most frustrating at times, but in the end it can wind up being one of the most rewarding parts of a guitar build, because it's what you can do to set your guitar apart from everything else that's out there. And that's one of the reasons I got into building guitars in the first place, was that I wanted to build for myself something with features that weren't commonly found on production models. You know, most Strats are very, very, very similar. You've got your typical 5-way switch. You've got your 3 single coils, tremolo. You might have maybe some upgraded pickups with different varying levels of hotness. Maybe a different magnet, whether it's the Alnico 3s or 5s or whatever the case may be, ceramic. But it's still going to be very much the same ballpark and sound very, very similar. The things that I find interesting are the things that are a little bit different, and that's why I chose to do this guitar the way I did, and some of my other guitars the way I did, because I like to have variety. I like to have something that's going to give me as many possible usable sounds as I can possibly get out of one instrument. I don't want to have to bring 5 guitars to get all the different sounds and then have to figure out the logistics of how you're going to switch in between those on the fly. That just gets to be very frustrating. To me, the only reason I would ever want to switch guitars in the middle of a set would be either it's like a drastically different tuning, or that I've broken a string or something of that nature to where I needed to just swap out immediately to have another guitar serviceable right then and there. So with that in mind, just want to give you one tool and one piece of advice that I wish I had starting off, and that's this right here. Something very simple. Just little alligator clips. Nothing fancy. These little guys will save your life. I went to Harbor Freight and I spent, I don't know, all of like $3.50, maybe $4 on these. It's a set of 8 of them, and like I said, they're just, roughly a foot long, and they're awesome because what it allows you to do is to test all of your connections before you actually solder them. Because if you're like me, I am definitely not the world's best solderer in the world. In the end, it will definitely get done. It's just probably not going to look really pretty. And the thing with that, though, is I'm even okay with that because I know that the more I do this and the more I work at it, that my work's going to get cleaner and it's going to get better. And so, just like anything, you can't jump into anything and expect it to be awesome right off the bat. What you do want to make sure, though, is that it's functional. And so, rather than having to solder, desolder, and resolder things, you want to get it right the first time. So, that's what those alligator clips allow you to do, is to test all your connections and make sure that everything works the first time before you solder it so that you can do it right the first time. That will save you so much frustration and so many headaches down the line. And honestly, I didn't do it enough on this build, and I really wish that I had. So I'm just giving you that little tidbit so that you can do it better when you get to building your own. So to dive a little bit more into this, we're going to be talking about the diagram of what I've done here. And so with that, I have chosen to go with the Def Eddy 5-way telecaster switching. And this is really cool because it gives you some extra sounds that you typically wouldn't get out of your standard telecaster. So what you'll get out of that is one position will be the neck, then you'll have both pickups in series, then you'll have both pickups in parallel, and then you'll have both pickups out of phase, and then just the bridge. So that's the heart of the wiring on this, as opposed to just the standard Telecaster switching, which has the neck, both pickups in parallel, and then just the bridge. So as you can see, it definitely gives you two other options. And so, we'll talk a little bit more probably next week about why you'd want some of these options. And we can delve into a little bit more maybe of what parallel and series is all about. I guess in a nutshell, the easiest way to describe it is if you think of your standard humbucker as two single coils, they're typically coming from the factory wired in series, and they're going to be hot. It's going to be a much hotter output. Parallel is going to be more typical of your positions 2 and 4 on a Strat, where you have both the neck and the middle, or the middle and the bridge connected, and that's a parallel connection. Again, it's either setup, either parallel or series, will be humbucking if you've done it properly. But the deal with that is that you'll definitely get a hotter output with the series. The parallel, why you'd want to go with a parallel as opposed to that, is using the example of a Strat, you're going to get a much more even response between your switch positions because they're not adding that extra output. So that way you will therefore have a much more even response. You won't have one position louder than the other, so to speak. However, that can in and of itself be useful because you could use that as a solo boost, or like I said, it could just be a different sound that you enjoy. Downsides to parallel is that you'll have a lot more of your frequencies canceling each other out, because anytime you have hum, you're canceling out a portion of your signal to accomplish that. Whenever you go to parallel, much less of the signal actually gets canceled out in that process, and so you wind up having it sounds cleaner. It doesn't drive your amp as hard, and it typically has more high end. Whereas when you go into series, it tends to be beefier on the low, mid, and the low frequencies, and kind of rolls off a little bit of your highs. But like I said, the advantage is you get that power, and so it can push your amp harder into like a natural overdrive. It just is going to interact more like a humbucker. So that's some of the main advantages of why you'd want to do that. And so I'm going to show you right here on the screen. I'm going to put up this diagram of the Def Eddy wiring, and it's also important to know this is not a standard 5-way switch. This is a 5-way super switch, which is actually way cool, and I think I'm starting to understand how it works a little bit just from doing this. mod, and so if you can follow the colors of the wires on this diagram, maybe take a screenshot of it so you can examine it later. If not, just go to defeddy.net. Just search for under Google. It's really easy to find. I can even include a link in the description for you if you're interested in that. But it's a super cool mod, and so that's the heart of it right there. It's kind of complicated and took a couple hours to get that switch right, but that was actually not even the hard part of this wiring. The most difficult part of this wiring is that I didn't completely follow the Def Eddy mod on this because I wanted some other features that didn't allow. The Def Eddy mod still relies on a master volume and a master tone in the same way that your standard Telecaster would have. Now, the way that I've got this wired, I showed you earlier the concentric pots that I used. You may have guessed what's going on there is that I have included a separate volume and a separate tone for each pickup. And in order to do that, I had to flip around some things. Instead of it being wired like a Telecaster, it's much more similar to a Les Paul in the way that this is wired. But it's not even quite like that because I had to do some variations on that as well. And the reason for that being is the way that we're doing the series switching and the out of phase switching, in that it changes the polarity of the wires. So this right here is the bridge pickup to the set that I used on this guitar. It's a P90. It's very simple. It's an inexpensive pickup. Got it off of Amazon. I'm going to include the link below. It is an affiliate link, so if you click on it, I will get a small commission off of that, and that's going to help me to improve the quality of these videos by getting some better camera and lighting equipment and some audio equipment, which will definitely help. But anyways, back to the pickup. So, as you can see, we have two wires. We've got the red wire, which is your hot or your signal, and then you have the unshielded, which a lot of people would typically say as either negative or ground. In this case, though, that's actually not true. It's basically the way to look at it as you've got your ground as the start and the red as the finish. Because just if you're not really too familiar with pickups, the way that it works is the bottom of the pickup is a magnet in this case, and then there's thousands of windings of very, very thin copper wire around there. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the coils. We're talking about that copper coiling that is the pickups. And so, like I said, the start will be the unshielded, and then the red will be the finish of the coil. Because as we all understand, hopefully, that electricity works in a circular fashion. It's a circuit, and so it moves in one direction. So, like I said, in, out, that's the way to understand it. And so that's kind of going to be key to what we're doing here. Okay, so if you remember from the Def Eddy diagram that I showed you, you'll notice that the tone and the volume pot come after the switch. In order to do the wiring the way I wanted to do, I needed to put the volume and the tone before the switch. And so if you can follow this diagram, this is what I initially wired it as. I took, like I said, that red signal wire, that's your positive, and so that runs from your pickup all the way around to the center lug on the pot for the volume, and connects with that to the capacitor and to the center lug on the tone pot. And then we ran with the negative, bearer, start, whichever way you want to refer to it, wire from the pickup and ran that to this lug right here, and then out to the switch. And then we took this other lug here and ran the signal out to the switch. And then you'll see that then there's the ground from the top of the tone pot and out to the bridge that we use for the grounding. However, this did not work. Wiring up this guitar took me something to the tune of 8 hours to get right, I would say. And so I was messing around with this right here because from some of my research, this seemed to be the right way to do it, but it turned out to not be the correct way at all. So after having messed around with this, I found out that that wasn't what we needed to go with. What we needed was instead this right here. So here's what I wound up really having to do in order to make this work. So we took the red finish signal wire from that pickup and ran it to this lug on the volume pot. Then from there, it bridges from a capacitor over into our tone pot. Then we have the start wire from the pickup in the blue here. It comes around, connects up to this lug on the volume, and then from there it connects over to this lug on the tone pot, and then from there out to the switch. Then from the center lug on your volume pot, that runs out to the switch. And then I also wound up using, as you can see, we've got these little screw holes here on either side of the pickup, which is what you'd use for the height adjustment inside the pick guard. I used a wire connecting to that post there as a separate ground wire coming off the pickup, and then I also ran a ground from the tone pot. So that's all your connected to common ground to your bridge. And that's how I wired each of the pickups on there so that they would have their own tone and volume, which is really effective. So it's also worth noting, here's how your typical pot is. So you've got your 3 lugs. So you've got input, and you've got the wiper or the output. So basically, as you dial the knob, that's going to adjust the amount that you have coming out of your pot. And then obviously you have your ground as well. So pretty simple, but just like I said, the more you understand that, the easier it is to kind of understand and make sense out of this diagram here of what I was actually doing. Okay, so let's talk about capacitors a little bit. So as I mentioned, I've got separate volumes and separate tones for each of the pickups. What's kind of cool is, like I said, the top here kind of controls the neck pickup. Bottom controls the bridge. This is all your volumes. This is all your tones. Same here. This is your neck. This is your bridge. What's cool about this is that I have different capacitors for each pot here. And they come stacked up on there, so it's really cool. Like I said, that I'm able to keep that same footprint as a standard telecaster, but I'm able to do more of a Les Paul style of wiring there. So why is that cool? So, like I said, in any of these 3 positions here, in the center where we're using both pickups, I'm allowed now to control which pickup is going to be dominant in that mix. So I could have it a little bridge heavy to be brighter, or a little roll that back and have the neck more dominant to have a little bit more of a fatter tone. You can also do the Eric Clapton deal where he would roll one of the tones almost all the way down and then blend between the 2 pickups to kind of get somewhat clean, somewhat muffled in there. You can do things like what a lot of guys used to do, where they would have different volumes on different pickups because they would use the way that a lot of the overdrives and the fuzzes would interact with the volume knob to have one of them as the clean sound and one of them as the dirty sound, and then just use the pickup selector as a foot switch to switch between a clean and a dirty sound. So you can do all of that with this type of a setup here, which I think is way cool. So again, for a single coil, your typical capacitor value would be 0.47, and that's what I've used here for the bridge. But I've used 0.15 for the neck, which is going to roll off a lot less treble. Basically, the higher the value of that capacitor, the more treble it's going to roll off as you turn that knob. And so, with that, like I said, this one's going to have a lot more clarity and a lot less dark sounding, a lot cleaner, a lot clearer, and that's what I was looking for. That's why I went with that. And like I said, then this is going to be just your typical bridge sound there. It's also worth noting that what's also going to have a huge impact on the overall brightness of your guitar is the actual pots themselves. Typically for, let's say, a Strat or most single coil guitars, if this was a standard tele, you'd probably find a 250K pot for both of these. However, all four pots that are involved here are 500K. And so having a 500K pot, that's a lot more typical of what you'd find in a Les Paul. And again, talking series parallel, the Les Paul tends to be a lot darker of a guitar, so it needs those brighter pots in order to still have some measure of brightness and clarity to it. However, when we use it with these, like I said, a P90, a lot of people will use like a 300K pot, so it'll be a little bit brighter than your typical single coil because they do run a little bit more mid-heavy and a little darker. Like I said, in this case, with both of them being 500s, it's so bright, it's so clean, it's beautiful. It jangles, it chimes, it does everything I want it to do, but it still has some bite and some growl when you dig in. It's a wonderful thing, and hopefully I'll be able to show you that in an upcoming video very soon. So I hope that this video was very informative for you, and join us as we continue exploring tone and some of the different things that we can do with our guitars to make them sound better. So that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in to Wolf Guitars and Gear. Join us again next week where we're going to actually show you what this guitar sounds like. So now, after talking about it for so long, we're going to actually hear what it sounds like next week. So be sure to not miss that. As always, click the subscribe button. Make sure that you hit the bell so that you get notifications of all future videos. Like and share this as many places as you like. I hope that it's informative. I hope that you're finding some value in what I'm bringing to the table here, so that as you hopefully are inspired to start trying some different things, either with guitars you already own, or maybe you want to start building your own kit guitar. Hopefully I'm showing you that it's something that you can do with very limited resources, and actually without a ton of woodworking knowledge. It's not difficult. It's just several things you got to make sure you get right. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I like to try to answer anything as best I can. I'm definitely not the most expert on this, but I will do whatever I can to try to help you out with everything along the way. And as always, we have a group on Facebook, Six String Dreams. Make sure you click the link, follow it over there, and join any discussion over there. Again, any questions you have, we have some great people in there, some really cool people. So don't be afraid to ask and share any questions, concerns, show us your guitar collection. So again, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.